Today, we're going to dive into the one Supreme Court case that totally blew the doors open for sports gambling in America. We're talking about Murphy versus the NCAA. This single decision didn't just reshape a multi-billion-dollar industry, it made us question the very balance of power between states and the federal government. So if you've watched any sports lately, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's just an absolute tidal wave of ads for DraftKings, FanDuel, all these betting apps. It feels like it just appeared out of nowhere. But this huge change wasn't a business move, it was a legal one. And it all comes back to one single blockbuster Supreme Court case.
You see, for 26 long years, a federal law basically kept sports betting illegal almost everywhere. But then, in 2018, one huge Supreme Court decision just flipped a switch. And boom, the industry we see today was born. To really get how we went from a nationwide ban to a nationwide free-for-all, we got to start with that law from 1992.
Okay, let's talk about the main bad guy in our story, a federal law called the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, or as everyone calls it, PASPA. Now, the key thing to understand about this law was who it was aimed at. Congress didn't make it a crime for you to place a bet. Nope. Instead, PASPA made it illegal for the states themselves to authorize or license sports gambling. It was a law pointed straight at state governments. And believe me, that distinction is everything.
And here's where it gets really weird. PASPA was super unusual. It didn't make sports betting a federal crime. It didn't have the FBI chasing down local bookies. What it did was basically hit pause on state law. It told the states, hey, you see those anti-gambling laws you have on your books? Well, we, the federal government, are now forbidding you from ever changing them. This is a really strange way to write a law, and it's the very thing that would eventually be its downfall.
So this odd law just sat there for decades, until one state decided it had had enough and was going to challenge it head-on. Enter our hero, the state of New Jersey, which saw a potential jackpot for its economy hiding in plain sight.
By the 2010s, Atlantic City was really having a tough time. So New Jersey looked at this massive, untaxed, illegal sports betting market and thought, hey, that could be a lifeline. They wanted to make it legal, tax it, and use that money to help their casinos and racetracks. But to do that, they had to pick a fight with PASPA, the federal government, and all the major sports leagues. A real David versus Goliath situation. And this right here, this is the heart of the whole thing. Forget about sports for a second. The real issue was about power. Does the U.S. Constitution let Congress march into a state capitol and give direct orders to the legislature? Can it tell them what laws they have to keep and what laws they're not allowed to get rid of? This question was so big, it had to go all the way to the Supreme Court.
Now, to answer that huge question, the court had to pull out a powerful but not so famous constitutional rule, the Anti-Commandeering Doctrine. This is the absolute key to understanding this whole case.
To put it simply, the Constitution set up a system of dual sovereignty. You've got the federal government and you've got the state governments, and they each have their own power. The Anti-Commandeering Doctrine basically says Congress can pass laws that apply to people and businesses, sure, but it can't treat the states like its puppets. It can't just commandeer or hijack a state's government to carry out federal orders.
Okay, this is a really important difference to get. The federal government absolutely can preempt state law. For example, if Congress sets a national minimum wage that's higher than a state's, the federal law wins out. That's constitutional because it's regulating private employers. But commandeering is totally different. That's not regulating people, it's regulating the state itself by giving it a direct command, and that's a big no-no.
So New Jersey's argument was really simple, but incredibly powerful. They said that PASPA's command, you are not allowed to repeal your sports betting ban, was a direct order from Washington to the state legislature. It wasn't regulating gambling, it was regulating the state's own lawmaking. It was, they said, a textbook case of unconstitutional commandeering. And guess what? The Supreme Court's majority agreed, big time. Justice Alito, writing for the court, came up with this amazing metaphor to explain just how wrong PASPA was. He said it was so direct, it was like putting federal guards inside the State House with the power to physically stop lawmakers from voting. Wow. So, with that powerful idea as their guide, let's take a look at how the court handed down its final verdict. The final vote? It wasn't even close. By a solid 6-3 margin, the Supreme Court sided with New Jersey. They declared that the very heart of PASPA was unconstitutional. The court basically said that telling a state it can't authorize or license something is a direct command, and you can't do that. But they didn't just stop there. They knocked down the entire law. And to understand why they did that, we need to look at one last legal concept.
The reason the whole entire law got thrown out comes down to a legal idea called severability.
So, whenever a court strikes down part of a law, it has to ask a simple question. Can the rest of the law still work on its own? It's kind of like if you find a rotten spot on an apple, can you just cut it out, or is the whole apple ruined? That's the severability test.
Okay, stick with me here because the court's logic on this was really clever. PASPA had this other part that banned private betting, but only if it was done pursuant to state law. So once the court got rid of the part that banned states from authorizing betting, it created this totally backwards situation. It meant that a state could make sports betting legal, and only then would it suddenly become a federal crime. If the state kept it illegal, it wasn't a federal crime. The court called this a perverse policy and said there's just no way Congress ever intended that bizarre result.
So, with the whole law struck down, poof, the federal ban was just gone. The power to decide what to do about sports betting went right back to where it was before 1992, with each individual state. Now, Congress could still pass a new law that regulates sports betting directly, but until they do, every state is free to choose its own path.
In the end, this case wasn't really about whether sports betting is good or bad. It was about who gets to decide. It was a powerful statement that the federal government can't just boss the states around. So the question is now back in our hands, leaving us with one final thought. Who do you think should have the power to decide on something like this? The federal government making one rule for the whole country, or should each state get to decide for itself?